Support for Lab Out Loud is provided by NSTA, the National Science Teaching Association. Find out more about what NSTA has to offer at nsta.org. You're listening to Lab Out Loud, Science for the Classroom and beyond. And today we're talking to another filmmaker. We ask all sorts of questions like, how do you make a film about science when it's constantly changing with new data?
I think for us, it comes down to one of the things we like to show in our films is scientific process. So we want to dig into how they know what they know, what questions they're trying to answer. When they know the answers, what does that actually mean? So process is really key. We think, first of all, we think it's interesting. It makes for good storytelling. And B, it just goes to the heart of understanding how science works.
That's up next on Lab Out Loud, but first, I'm your co-host, Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartel. So, Dale, we're getting to the time of year where we have a couple breaks coming up. We have Thanksgiving break coming up. We have a winter break coming up. But we're getting to a point where, traditionally we might find some time to watch a good science film. And that might be a little bit harder if you are, executing at-home learning. However, we found a few resources that you might be able to use either in the classroom with students or if they're at home.
Yeah, things that are available to students that they can pull up on their device at home, free for them to watch, legit copies of things. Those are all nice things to add to the class. And you're right, it is nice to kind of sometimes have, I guess, maybe a long form because you don't have those constraints of the classroom bells. And so you can offer this across a long period of time and have the ability for kids to watch that, kind of digest it, and then do some of the reflection on it.
And take some time to do some learning at home with the entire family. So some of these are appropriate to, say, have a Friday night at the movies with the family and watch a documentary on the Voyager spacecraft or a lot of others that we just learned about from the show.
I think it's important to shuffle those kinds of in. You can watch your Marvel's Avengers movie, but then, just like today, we're going to watch this thing about octopuses.
That's right. Octopi? Octopuses.
I did watch that, by the way.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, we talk about it later in this episode, but I went back and watched it.
And I do have a link to it for our listeners who want to become watchers. See what I did there?
Oh, I like it.
Yeah. In any case, so we're definitely continuing our theme of videos, films, documentaries for science. And this week's no exception. In fact, many of you who were lucky enough to attend an NSTA conference may have remembered the HHMI Night at the Movies that was offered. And if you were at one of the most recent ones there, you'll remember that there was like a standing room only or standing line only. Mm-hmm. There was a big line waiting of educators waiting to get in to see basically movie night at the NSTA conference. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about that with someone from the HHMI Tangled Bank Studios.
I'm Jared Lipworth. I am executive producer and head of outreach and impact at HHMI Tangled Bank Studios. So I oversee production of documentaries and I oversee the outreach and impact campaigns we build around them.
Tangled Bank, huh?
Yeah, I was thinking, where does that name come from?
It comes from Darwin. He talks about a tangled bank. Not too many people make the connection, but there is some method to our madness there.
We hear a lot about biointeractive when we think about HHMI. What kind of interaction do you have with them? What is are you different? Are you the same? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, they are sisters and brothers, I would say. We are both Tangled Bank and Biointeractive are in the education department at HHMI. So they produce materials primarily for use in classrooms, and we produce documentaries, films, feature films, shorts for general consumption, public audiences. And then there's a lot of crossover between those two.
Absolutely. There are usually when we have face-to-face NSTA conferences, in the last few years we've had like a movie night. I think it's usually been a Friday night where HHMI has sponsored a movie night, for educators. And can you tell us a little bit about what that was, or at least what it used to be?
and hopefully will one day be again.
Exactly. That was the next question, but tell us a little bit about what you had in the past there.
Yeah, so I think the movie nights at NSTA kind of go to the core of our philosophy on science storytelling. Our tagline at Tangled Bank Studios is Science Story Inspiration, and we're looking at storytelling as a means of engagement in science, creating understanding, creating comfort, and creating inspiration in stories that are somehow tied to science. So, movie night for us at NSTA is an opportunity to do that and to showcase the power of storytelling in bringing science concepts to life.
Are these usually full-length feature films like documentaries, or?
Yes. So the last couple of years, I think 2 years ago, we did the Serengeti Rules, which is it was a feature documentary that did the festival circuit and then aired on PBS as part of the Nature series. We actually just won an Emmy for it a couple of weeks ago, so we're pretty excited.
Congratulations.
Nice.
That's Sean Carroll. He's from Wisconsin.
Exactly.
We talked to Sean when that came out.
Ah, okay, perfect. So yeah, so it was based on his book, The Serengeti Rules, and we think that was that was great. It was a way to really tackle some big ecological concepts through some very personal stories, and again, comes down to the storytelling. A good way to make some of those big picture ecology ideas relevant on a personal level. Last year, I believe. The years are blending together, but last year I believe we did Inventing Tomorrow, which was a film that looked at a bunch of kids from around the world who were bringing their environmental projects to the International Science Fair. Again, that was, we thought that was a great opportunity because the film highlighted mentoring and highlighted activism and kids taking control of the fate of our planet. And we thought that would be pretty inspiring for teachers, and got a great reaction from the teachers at that one. We had a couple of the kids there for a panel afterwards, and they were sort of celebrities. They were long lines of people who wanted to talk to them after the film.
Well, I was going to ask what kind of feedback have you gotten from these movie nights? And, it's a Friday night, so that's right. Usually it's on a Friday night?
I'm not sure about that. It's sort of which we find the best night in whatever NSTA. I think sometimes it's Thursday, but, the feedback is generally always positive because we offer free food. So, who doesn't want to come for free dinner?
But these are fully packed kind of like rooms that you're usually using. So it does have quite a bit of draw. I remember a few years ago when we were at a conference again that there was like standing room only lines that were, I want to say it was Atlanta, that lines were, snaking through the next room. Yeah,
the turnout has been phenomenal. It's such a great, huge conference. We've had more than 1,000 people at the last couple. We think it is a draw because it goes back to inspiration. I think we made a point as Tangled Bank. There's a lot of doom and gloom out there. Those stories are very important to tell, but our focus is generally on what can be done and on stories of hope, stories that showcase how science makes the world better. And I think, teachers recognize that, that's inspiring for them and that's inspiring for their audiences. So we've kind of turned it into an ongoing event, and we'd like to think that the teachers get a lot out of it, and it's a bit of a different pace from the other conferences and workshops that are going on during NSTA. So it's become a little bit of our signature event.
Mm-hmm. In fact, Dale and I have talked about this before, but that the movie screenings, and we've done this with a couple documentaries there, are kind of a highlight for us because, these are some bigger name things that you can't just get anywhere. And when you have a producer, a director, or, the documentarian there to discuss it along with you, that's pretty powerful. And as you mentioned, having the kids there from the inventor side of things, that's also, you can't get that everywhere.
Yeah. Well, and that's very much part of our philosophy. And I think when it comes to our storytelling, one of the reasons Tangled Bank was founded was to give voice to scientists. So it's not always just the filmmakers who are producing, who are sort of parachuting in to tell a story and then off they go. We try to dig deeper and work more closely with the scientists along the way. And then on the outreach side and on the education side, that carries over. It's also about, giving voice to the teachers, hearing from them about what they need, and giving them the opportunity to dive in deeper and understand why we're doing what we're doing, understand from the people we decide to feature what's special about their story. So, very much in line with our goals as an impact studio.
When you mentioned that you had Sean Carroll on, and that obviously that was one of the movie features there. Sean Carroll is pretty well known for his skill in storytelling. And here you are trying to do storytelling of a storyteller. What have you learned from him, or and vice versa? What has he learned from you in the course of that project?
Sure. Well, that project, because he wrote the book, but he's the head of our studio, and he is involved with all of our projects. And it's you don't come across people very often who are that good at that many things. And, he likes to claim that he's not a filmmaker, but he has incredible instincts when it comes to how to tell a story. He also has incredible expertise in clarifying science. So, it's not only that we want to get the science right, but we want to make sure that it's told in a way that makes sense to an audience. And, he does that in his books. He does that in his lab. He does that with the film studio. So, it's fun to be able to bounce ideas off of him, to get down into the nitty gritty of how to tell a certain piece of the story or the stories as a whole. So he brings a lot to the table.
Sure. Jared, the tagline you mentioned before, science, story, inspiration, is that sort of a linear progression as you plan to make the films, choose the topics for the films? Is it always kind of starting with the science?
No, I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say it's, I think it's more in a way chronological, having to do with our evolution maybe than it is about how each project is developed. We look at every project through a number of different lenses. We have kind of content boxes of the kinds of stories we like to tell. But one of those, the elements we look at is it somehow science related? And some are, very intensely science related. Others are more peripheral to the science. We look at the story because, again, for us, it really does come down to storytelling. And, how do you bring something to life? What angles do you take? And then the inspiration side is just because that's, we feel that there's a need for hope. We feel that there's a need for an understanding that all is not lost and that there is a lot we can do and a lot that science can do. So, more lenses than, sort of boxes to check.
Mm-hmm. Do you find yourself having certain areas of science? You talked about the content boxes that you're looking for, where you're just like, oh, we need a good story for, we haven't touched on, I don't know, pick a subject, but we haven't gotten anything in this area.
What do you have in geology, Jared?
Yeah. Does that ever drive the conversation, or is it like we have these stories to go over?
I think I don't think it drives us as much as it drives BioInteractive. They are much more careful about what areas they feel there's a need for materials. For us, we are always looking for great stories. Our buckets, if I can sort of describe them in really basic terms, it's, we have a bucket that's pioneers of science, frontiers of medicine, the health of our planet, countering denialism. So a lot of our films will sort of fit into multiple buckets. It's more a question of are we trying as an outreach effort and as an impact studio, are we trying to build strands? So right now we have quite a few films that are in the ecology and conservation space. And, when you have multiple films, it lets you build an outreach campaign that's going to be bigger and have more impact. So I wouldn't say we sort of say, all right, here's a topic we need to cover. It's more about, where did the stories that we come upon or develop, where do they fit? Do they do what we want them to do within those buckets?
It's interesting that you mention countering denialism. We've had a few people on the show talking about movies and film, and some of their upcoming projects are kind of centered around that as well. We have one that's a future on what we see with vaccines and some other combating misinformation or disinformation, and this definitely seems to be a theme that we're seeing. Can you tell us more about why you thought that's important and maybe progress on something? That sounds like maybe you're giving us a little a nugget of what's to come.
I think it's if your goal is to tell good stories about science and to highlight the power of science, then you kind of categorically head towards countering denialism, because those are the folks who just don't believe it. So it doesn't necessarily, we're not an activist organization, so we may not sort of go down the route of an explicit film that is about that is called countering denialism or anything like that. But our story, stories that feature ecology and evolution are telling that story and providing good facts about how that all works, how that process works. We've got another film in the works right now on the COVID vaccine efforts. And so again, one of the angles we're looking at is this the sense from some folks that they're not going to take the vaccine. So we want to make sure the information we're providing is accurate, understandable, digestible, and is providing people with good information.
Well, you had vaccines calling the shots. That was, I'm just looking this up, 2014.
Yep.
Kind of want to go back and watch it now, right?
There've been a few. That one was before my time. But and there's a few that sort of have re-aired. Genetic medicine is another area we've done a film about. So we do some stuff in the medical space, but a lot of other stuff as well. Our IMAX film, Amazon Adventure, was an evolution story about Bates and his work. So again, that's an area where we feel like visually IMAX is phenomenal. You've got a captive audience. You've got an audience that is quite often in a science museum. So there's an opportunity there, but a lot of those films don't have very much good science in them. So, that's one of the reasons we're in that space, because we feel there's an opportunity to bring more science to the storytelling in that arena.
Sure.
No, sure.
Well, I heard if we bring it back to vaccines, like the vaccine from Pfizer, the recent release is that 90% effective. And I was listening to the news and they're like, that is preliminary results, and people are reading preliminary results right now. And that's going to change, because that's what happens as science changes. Do you find yourself ever thinking about that story? Because you kind of make these films, and they kind of put a, they ink it, right? It's done. It makes, there's a permanence to them. How do you deal with that when you're telling the story, so that you don't? So I guess that you leave that process of science open.
Yeah, you don't etch it in stone.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very much what we're, we are very much thinking about that, and that specific example as well. I think for us, it comes down to one of the things we like to show in our films is scientific process. So it's not just, we tend to shy away from the films that are just going to kind of spew information and not really dig into how people know that. So for us, that particular instance, in that in that instance, we want to dig into how they know what they know, what questions they're trying to answer. When they know the answers, what does that actually mean? So it's very much, in the case of a vaccine, it's very much about exploring what the process is to come up with those vaccinations, how they're going to work, what happens, even as simple as what happens when the first one it comes out and is a success. What does that do to the others that are farther down the line? So
sure.
Process is really key. We think, first of all, we think it's interesting. It makes for good storytelling. And B, it just goes to the heart of understanding how science works.
It does make for good storytelling because it's not that I think people expect to be, and then they lived happily ever after. And then there's a scientist in the back going, no, wait, we got more data.
And it's not just you're putting in it for a sequel either.
Right, exactly. No, you can't just leave
Science
it
is all about sequels, though.
Yeah. So, Jared, you mentioned that you tackle longer feature films and shorter films as well. We've talked to people that have done both, or done, either, but not necessarily both. How do you tackle each project like that? That it's a short film versus a long film, and a lot of probably things in between.
Well, I think, it's one of the ways that we're unique is that we spend our time making these large films, and then we also look at how do you spin off other material from that. For different audiences, formal education versus informal. So in many films, we'll have a feature film, and then BioInteractive may do a 20-minute version of an educational film that can be used in classrooms. On the short form at the moment, we're working with Seeker to do some short stories that are on similar topics to some of our feature films. We've explored some projects in the short form digital space. I think that's an area we'd like to see grow a bit. But it's a fun challenge because it's a very different approach to storytelling. And I think thinking back to sort of when people first started kind of dealing with digital content, there was this feeling from the long form people that, you can create a short and then people will watch it and go watch your long form. And I think that occasionally it happens. It's nice to think that it might happen, but the way I look at it, the way we look at it is that you have to assume that whatever experience your viewer gets may be the only one they get. So if you're going to do a 3-minute piece, that 3-minute piece needs to work on its own. It can't just be a tidbit to push people to the film. So, I think that's a fun challenge. We can create a 1-hour Nova, and we can create 7-minute shorts that are maybe all people get, but they're still learning something about the story.
You mentioned that there are opportunities when you're making your projects that might tie into educational resources afterwards. What are some of those resources, and how might educators find them?
So the easiest way to find them is on the BioInteractive site. They've just redone their site recently, and you can, it's pretty easy to find materials on just about any topic. We think about it from the beginning. We try not to only think about it after the fact and say, here's a great movie. What do you guys want to do with it? It's more about thinking from the beginning, what are the various elements that could come out of this? Let's plan it so that when we're shooting, we're making sure we're getting the right material. We look at it as both on the formal side and the informal side. So we had a film that aired on Nova last year called Rise of the Mammals, which was an archaeological find that came out of the Science Museum in Denver. So we also did some short pieces that are in their exhibit at the museum. We just had a film that aired about a month ago on Nova called Nature's Fear Factor, which was a story about, on one level, the reintroduction of wild dogs to Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique, and on a deeper level about the theory of the landscape of fear and how predators impact an ecosystem not just by what they consume, but by the way they change prey species behavior just by being there. So on that film, it was a 1-hour film for Nova. We also created a whole bunch of different shorts that tackle various components of that piece. And Seeker is working on a piece right now that is also tackling that subject. So, it's more and more we'd love to find multiple utilizations of the same story because we see different audiences, different goals.
Are there any favorites? Like, what gets the most hits?
Who? Well,
I love all my children.
Yeah, that's two different questions. What I think of my children and what other people think of my children.
Ow. we have teenagers. We know what you're talking about.
I think, there's a film we did last year called Our Gorongosa, which is actually there's not all that much science in that film. It's a story about Mozambique, about the Gorongosa National Park. And it's a look at how that park has a mission to tie conservation, animal conservation, ecosystem conservation to community development. So in this day and age, you can't have a national park that doesn't benefit the people who live around it. So, this film started out as a little film that we were just we wanted to make sure we were documenting the various work that they were doing that wasn't tied to the natural history. And it just developed into a pretty powerful story of what they're trying to do there and of some there's a focus on women and of these incredible women who are, just so dedicated to building up the communities around the park, which benefits both the communities and the park. And so that's definitely one of my favorites in recent years.
I thought, Brian, you were going to ask the question because students and teachers are making so many films right now because they're doing virtual. If you had any advice before we, because our teachers are listening, students are listening, advice for telling that story as a way to, I guess, to inspire learning from the teacher side and for students to tell that story to, convey what they've learned.
Yeah. This for me, it always comes back to the writing. I've talked about this over the years, and I think when I started out in this business, I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to edit. I didn't know how to shoot. I didn't know how to write. I learned all of it along the way. Nowadays, you see people who, by the time they start officially in the business, they already know how to shoot. They already know how to edit. They've been doing it for years and years. But what often gets forgotten is the writing and the storytelling, and really sitting down and thinking about what story are you trying to tell, what is the narrative arc of that story, and both on the larger level of that narrative arc and then down to the fine tuning of the words you're using. I think paying attention to that early and often is the key to a successful film.
And we've heard this before, absolutely, that the writing and the work going into the film before you actually do the recording is paramount to actually having a successful project. And I think that needs to be reiterated a lot to our students sometimes, because a lot of times they dive right into the camera without thinking about what they're recording. And of course, sometimes they don't always basically portray what they think they were going to before they actually sat down and did it.
Right. I had this conversation with a filmmaker recently, and there are some filmmakers who like to go into the field and get what they get and then come and figure it out afterwards. And occasionally that'll work, but it makes your life a lot harder if you do the work up front. If you have a really good idea what you think you want, then you're in a position when you're out in the field to either get that or to adapt to changing circumstances or to changing story. But the legwork up front, I think, makes a huge amount of difference.
And before you go into that effects section of your editing and camera, get your story down first.
Exactly.
That's just a PSA against like star wipe transitions.
Exactly. And fix it in post is not a good starting strategy for filmmaking.
Since we're on the topic, before we let you go, do you see a difference in the way that we are using film in the classroom versus in a virtual setting? Do you see a difference in how it should be used? Or I guess, can you talk a little bit about that? Obviously, we're in a remote learning scenario in many districts right now.
Yeah. I'm more on the informal side, so I'm not sure that I'm the best person to talk about the use in classrooms. But again, I think it's there's more opportunity because everybody's on their screens anyway. But in my opinion, film is a great way to bring education to life. I mean, I was, before I was at Tangled Bank years ago, I worked on a series called Secrets of the Dead, which was a series that used forensic archaeology to explore mysteries from the past. And before I worked on that series, I was not much of a history buff. I didn't particularly like that from my schooling. But when I started working on that series and realized how much you're bringing to life events from the past in that format, it completely changed my perspective. And I think in science, it's the same thing. If you think about what you learn in your textbooks, or you think about a 3-minute piece, a 20-minute piece, or a 1-hour piece, that gives you insights you're not going to get. And it brings it to life in a way that makes you understand how it affects your life, how it affects our planet. So I think, again, it comes down to that inspiration. It's sparking something inside you that you might not get purely from the classroom, from the textbooks, from the lectures, from those other media.
I'm also wondering if there's an opportunity in the home to bring this to a larger audience, in the sense that, we can talk about having, let's do a little film viewing at home and maybe engage the family. One of the drawbacks in watching a longer film in the classroom is that you may only have a 50-minute segment, and, a good instruction, you might pause it and talk about something. So if you have a long film, you're extending this over days, but you might have the opportunity now to just do it all in one sitting, sit back and enjoy it, have a little night at the movies and bring it into the family.
Absolutely. And I think, my family has been doing that. We have Friday and Saturday. I've got a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old. So it's Friday and Saturday night movie nights. And usually it's a Disney film. But a couple of weeks ago, we all sat down and we watched My Octopus Teacher. And,
I hear that's so good. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it's an amazing film. We all loved it. So yeah, when we're making our films, we often think about the length, because we recognize that if you want to watch a film in a classroom, it's difficult if the film crosses over the length of one period. So, there's shorter versions, there's clips, that kind of thing. And those can be great because they can tie directly into the curriculum and make a point that is being taught at that moment. But, even on our biointeractive site, we have a section of all the long films that we have the rights to put up there. And it's for that purpose exactly. It's just sit back, watch, enjoy. Don't turn it into an assignment. Just think about, the enjoyment of these great stories that happen to be about science at their core.
Mm-hmm. Well, we know what we're going to do this weekend now, so we have some plans, and actually we are watching The Right Stuff in the Disney Channel there, and it's been great to think about the history in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Jared, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to diving into the bank of what you have in the library. Not the Tangled Bank, but I was thinking of like the actual collection of it.
I see what you did there.
Into the films there.
And anything you see there, I mean, we work very hard to make sure that teachers can see our films. So we even from our website, you can set up screenings, we can get you copies. That is a big priority for us. So, for everybody out there, check out the website, see what you like, and we'll help you watch it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time, Jared. Enjoy filming.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Lab Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about some of the things discussed in this episode or previous episodes, you can find show notes at our website, laboutloud.com. If you have a guest idea or a future topic that you'd like to see on Lab Out Loud, go to our contact page and send us a message. Also, you can subscribe to Lab Out Loud on your favorite podcasting app, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you like to find podcasts. While you're there, leave us a review and rating. Your input helps others find our show. Thanks again for listening.